Years from now, people will still talk about the moment Barack Obama walked into Donald Trump's Oval Office and left him absolutely speechless. Historians will write entire chapters about it. Political analysts will debate its significance for decades. Students will study this confrontation in civics classes, trying to understand what real leadership looks like when stripped down to its essence. The air inside the White House that morning felt different. Heavier, charged with electricity, thick with anticipation. It wasn't the kind of silence that brings peace or comfort. This was the kind that makes your chest tighten, that makes your palms sweat, that makes you hyper-aware of every breath, every movement. This was the silence before a storm, the calm that precedes something seismic. Security guards stood straighter than usual, their eyes sharper, more alert, scanning every corner with heightened vigilance. Staff members whispered quietly in the hallways, their conversations hushed and careful, as if speaking too loudly might somehow trigger the tension that everyone could feel building. And every step that echoed down those marble halls seemed to carry an unspoken warning, a message that rippled through the building like an electric current. Something important is about to happen here. Something that will be remembered. Inside the Oval Office, the president's chair faced the tall window, morning sunlight streaming across its polished surface. Donald Trump sat there, hands clasped on the armrest, eyes fixed on the door like a man waiting for his opponent. He had called for this meeting himself. The purpose, at least on paper, was a discussion on national matters, a serious conversation about policy and unity. But everyone knew that wasn't the full story. This meeting had a shadow behind it, because the man about to walk through that door was Barack Obama, the one person who had publicly humiliated Donald Trump years ago at the White House. Correspondents' dinner with nothing more than perfectly timed jokes and an unshakable smile. Trump had sat in that audience, face reddening, jaw clenched, while the room erupted in laughter. He'd never forgotten that night. Now Trump had the power, the title, the office, and for a man like him, that meant one thing. It was time to settle the score. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. Tick, tick, tick. Then the doors opened. Barack Obama stepped through with that familiar calm stride, the same confident walk that had once filled stadiums with applause. Now it carried him across a room charged with tension. He wore his usual half-smile, not forced, just politely knowing, the kind that says, "I see what's happening here, but I won't let it shake me." Trump stood up, extending his hand. "Barack," he said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mr. President," Obama replied, shaking his hand firmly. His tone was respectful, but his posture spoke volumes. This wasn't submission. This wasn't fear. For a brief moment, the two men looked at each other. The room went still. If you could bottle that tension, it could have powered the entire White House. Staff members positioned themselves along the walls, avoiding eye contact, pretending to be invisible. No one dared breathe too loudly. Trump gestured to the chair across from him. "Have a seat." Obama nodded and sat down smoothly. A folder lay beside him, neat, organized, with color-coded tabs marking topics like economic reforms and foreign policy. He had come prepared to talk about the country's future. But Trump had something else entirely on his mind. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. The small talk didn't last long. "How's Michelle?" Trump asked casually. "She's doing well," Obama responded evenly. "Still inspiring people? Everywhere she goes." Trump nodded. "That's good. That's good." There was a pause that dragged on too long. Then came the smirk. "You know," Trump said, his voice dripping with forced charm, "I still get letters about your birth certificate. People really wonder about that, don't they?" The room froze. Every staffer's eyes darted to Obama. There it was, the move everyone had feared or expected. Trump had brought back the birther conspiracy, the racist claim that Obama wasn't born in the United States. Obama didn't blink, not once. He simply sat there, fingers interlaced calmly, expression steady. His eyes met Trump's, not with anger, but with quiet certainty. The silence stretched. Trump's grin widened, waiting for a reaction. But Obama just leaned back, exhaled softly and said, "You're still on that?" That simple line cut sharper than any insult could have. It wasn't aggressive or loud, but it carried the weight of someone who had moved past this nonsense years ago and couldn't believe he was being asked to revisit it. Trump chuckled, pretending not to be fazed. "Hey, I'm just saying what people are saying. You know how it is." Obama nodded slowly. Then, without defensiveness, he reached into his folder and pulled out a neatly folded document. He slid it across the desk. His birth certificate, the same official document released years ago. "There it is again," Obama said lightly. "You can check it as many times as you need to. The paper hasn't changed." Trump's smile flickered for a split second, a tiny crack in the mask. The silence returned, heavier now. The clock seemed louder. Tick, tick, tick. Obama didn't say another word. He just sat there, composed. The tension now belonged entirely to Trump. For the first time since the meeting began, Trump looked unsettled. He straightened his tie, cleared his throat, forced another grin. "Well," he said too quickly, "I guess that settles it then." Obama's voice stayed calm. "It's been settled. For years, Donald." That tone, calm, steady, certain, carried a power all its own. Not loud, not aggressive, but containing something stronger. Complete control. Trump shifted uncomfortably. The energy had shifted. What was supposed to be his show of dominance was starting to look like a man trying to win a game his opponent refused to play. For a long moment, no one spoke. Outside, the wind rustled the flag. Inside, the silence felt heavier than ever. Obama looked around the office, at the paintings of past presidents, at the stacks of papers, at the ticking clock. Then he looked back at Trump. "So, are we ready to discuss the nation's future?" Trump hesitated. His confidence flickered. He hadn't expected this kind of calm resistance. He hadn't expected Obama to hold the room without raising his voice once. That was the thing about Obama. He didn't need to shout to be heard. His calmness was his power, and as the clock struck the next minute, everyone knew this wasn't just a meeting anymore. This was a chess match between two very different kinds of strength. Trump leaned forward abruptly, his body language turning aggressive. "So tell me, Barack," he began, voice suddenly serious, "are we sure you were even born here?" The words hit like thunder. Every sound vanished. An aide stopped writing mid-sentence. Another's eyes went wide. Obama didn't move a muscle. His expression remained calm, but inside something shifted, not anger, but profound disappointment that they were still here. Trump continued, gaining momentum. "Because you know what people say, right? There are questions, real questions. Someone has to ask them." He paused dramatically, expecting Obama to defend himself, to get angry, to justify, but Obama just sat there, silent, still, his hands folded calmly. The silence stretched. 5 seconds, 10, 15. Finally, Obama spoke quietly. "I've already answered this question, Donald. Not once, not twice, many times. The documents are public. The facts are public. What exactly are you looking for?" Trump waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, come on. You know there are always doubts. People write me letters, thousands of them. Important people. Smart people," Obama repeated slowly, making the words sound like a challenge. "Smart people don't ignore evidence. They don't cling to debunked conspiracy theories just because they don't like the truth." Trump's face reddened. "I'm not clinging to anything. I'm representing millions of Americans." "No," Obama interrupted, his voice steel calm. "You're representing a lie you promoted and profited from, a lie you used to build your political career, a lie designed to make people question whether a black man could legitimately be president." The room went completely silent. Someone gasped softly. Trump's mouth opened, then closed. For once, he appeared genuinely speechless. "If you were standing in Barack Obama's shoes right now, facing someone who keeps questioning your legitimacy despite years of proof, how would you handle it? Would you lose your composure, or would you stay calm like he did? Share your thoughts in the comments below." Obama's voice gained strength while remaining perfectly controlled. Every word carried weight, carried purpose, carried years of accumulated frustration at having to defend something that should never have been questioned in the first place. "You started this birther movement. You didn't just participate in it. You led it. You championed it on every platform available to you. You went on television over and over again, demanding to see documents that had already been publicly released and verified by independent authorities. You questioned my legitimacy as president for years, not for months, not casually, but relentlessly, obsessively, year after year after year. Not because you had evidence, not because you had facts, not because you had any legitimate reason whatsoever, but because you had a platform, an audience, and an agenda." "Now wait just a minute," Trump tried to interject, his voice rising defensively. "No, you wait," Obama said firmly, his tone leaving absolutely no room for argument or interruption. "You brought this up, Donald. You dragged this racist conspiracy theory back into this office after all these years. You couldn't help yourself. So let's be absolutely clear about something, and let's make sure everyone in this room understands what we're really talking about here." He paused deliberately, making eye contact with several staffers before returning his gaze to Trump. "This birther conspiracy was never about documents. It was never about facts or evidence or legitimate concerns. It was never about anything related to actual policy or governance. It was about trying to delegitimize me because of the color of my skin. Plain and simple. And you know it, I know it, everyone in this room knows it, and the American people knew it then and know it now." Trump's face went from red to almost purple. "That's ridiculous. This has nothing to do with..." "With what?" Obama asked. eyebrows raising. With race? Really? Then explain why no white president in American history has ever had their birth certificate questioned. Explain why no white president has ever been asked to prove they were really American. I'll wait. The silence was deafening. Trump's mouth worked soundlessly, trying to formulate a response. But there wasn't one. They both knew it. Obama leaned forward. You want to talk about legitimacy, about questions. Let's talk about tax returns. Let's talk about conflicts of interest. Let's talk about foreign business dealings and undisclosed debts. Let's talk about all the financial documents you've refused to release. Should we discuss those questions, Donald? Trump's hands gripped the desk edge until his knuckles went white. This meeting, Obama cut through, was supposed to be about the country, about leadership, about moving forward, but you couldn't help yourself. You had to drag us back. You had to try one more time to score cheap points against me. He stood slowly, his full height imposing. Trump remained seated, suddenly looking smaller. I came here today in good faith, Obama said, disappointment palpable. I came ready to have a serious discussion about issues facing real Americans, but instead you wanted to replay your greatest hits. You wanted to humiliate me the way you felt humiliated. Trump finally stood, pride forcing him to match Obama's posture. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do, Obama said simply. The correspondence dinner. You've never gotten over it. I made some jokes at your expense, and you've been nursing that wound since. But here's the difference. When someone embarrasses you, you seek revenge. When someone challenges me, I prove them wrong with facts and dignity. Trump's jaw clenched so tightly you could see muscles working beneath his skin. You think you're so perfect. You think you can just walk in here and act superior. I don't think I'm perfect, Obama responded calmly. I made mistakes during my presidency. I'll be the first to admit that, but I learned from them. I owned them. I didn't blame others or cry fake news every time someone criticized me. He took a step closer. That's what leadership actually is, Donald. It's accountability. It's humility. It's putting the country before your ego, something you might want to consider. Trump's face had gone from purple to an alarming shade of red. How dare you come into my office and lecture me? I won this election. I'm the president now. People chose you, Obama agreed, and now you have a choice. You can use that power to help people, to unite the country, to tackle real problems, or you can use it to settle petty grudges and spread conspiracy theories and divide Americans. So far, you've chosen the latter. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. What do you think about how Obama is handling this? Trump pointed across the desk, his hand trembling. You don't get to tell me how to be president. You had your 8 years. This is my office now. Mine. Yes, it is, Obama said quietly, his calmness contrasting with Trump's explosive energy. And that's exactly what concerns me, because this office isn't supposed to be about you. It's not supposed to be about me either. It's supposed to be about 330 million Americans who depend on whoever sits in that chair to put them first. He glanced at the presidential seal. That chair doesn't belong to you. You're just borrowing it. And when you leave, whether in 4 or 8 years, the only thing that will matter is what you did with that time. Will you be remembered for making people's lives better or for making them angrier and more divided? Trump's breathing was heavy. Get out, he said, voice low and dangerous. Get out of my office. Gladly, Obama replied without hesitation. But before turning to leave, he added, You know what the real tragedy is, Donald. You actually have the power to do good things, real things, things that would help real people. But you're so consumed with settling scores and feeding your ego that you're wasting it. He picked up his folder. But Trump wasn't finished. You were the worst president in American history, he called out venomously. Everyone knows it. Obama stopped walking. He didn't turn around, didn't even look back, just stood there, shoulders rising with a deep breath. Then, over his shoulder, If I was so terrible, Donald, why are you still so obsessed with me? Why do you still talk about me every day? Why do you measure yourself against my presidency constantly? Could it be because deep down you know you'll never measure up? Trump looked like he'd been physically struck. His mouth opened, but no words came. His face cycled through shades of red and purple. Obama finally turned fully. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't smug. It was disappointed. The look a teacher gives a student who wasted their potential. You wanted to humiliate me today, Obama said softly. You wanted revenge for being embarrassed years ago. You wanted to watch me squirm, to see me angry, to make me look small. But here's what you don't understand. He walked slowly back toward the desk. You can't humiliate someone with lies. You can't diminish someone with false conspiracies. You can't make someone look small by stooping low yourself. All you do is show everyone who you really are, and today you've shown them very clearly. The staffers were frozen, witnessing history unfold. Trump's voice came out hoarse. I don't have to listen to this, not in my own office. No, you don't, Obama agreed. You're the president. You can have me escorted out right now. You have that power, but having the power to silence someone and having the wisdom to listen are two very different things. Just like having a title and being a leader are two very different things. He adjusted his jacket. I genuinely hope, for America's sake, that you learn the difference, but I'm not holding my breath. Trump stood rigid. You're going to regret this. You're going to regret disrespecting me like this. Obama smiled sadly. Donald, I already regret it. I regret that this is what our political discourse has become. I regret that I had to waste time defending my birth certificate again instead of discussing real issues. I regret that you're so small-minded you can't see past your own grudges. He moved toward the door with finality, but he paused at the threshold. But you know what I don't regret? I don't regret serving this country with honor. I don't regret treating people with respect, even when they didn't deserve it. I don't regret trying to make things better instead of just making them louder. And I don't regret standing here today and speaking truth to you, even though I knew you wouldn't want to hear it. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in this story so far. What would you have said if you were Obama? Share your thoughts in the comments. The weight of Obama's words hung in the air. Trump stood frozen behind his desk, his face a mask of rage, mixed with something that might have been recognition that he'd lost this confrontation despite holding all the official power. You walk around acting like you're some kind of saint, Trump finally said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage, his composure completely shattered. Like you never did anything wrong, like your presidency was absolutely perfect, like you made zero mistakes. But I remember the scandals. I remember every single one of them. I remember the failures, the controversies, the times things went wrong on your watch. Of course you remember, Obama interrupted, his patience clearly wearing thin now, though his voice remained measured and controlled. You've spent every single waking moment since 2009, since before I even took office, obsessing over my every move, my every decision, my every word, my every breath. You've made a career out of criticizing everything I did, everything I said, everything I stood for. But here's what you conveniently forget, what you consistently leave out of all your attacks, what you refuse to acknowledge. I owned my mistakes, every single one of them. When things went wrong under my administration, when policies didn't work as intended, when situations didn't turn out the way we hoped, I didn't blame my predecessor for 8 straight years. I didn't spend my entire presidency pointing fingers at George W. Bush. I didn't make endless excuses. I didn't call everyone who criticized me my enemy or claim they were part of some vast conspiracy against me. He stepped back toward the desk. You know what your problem is? It's not that you're conservative or have different policies. Americans can handle political disagreement. Your problem is that you can't handle criticism without declaring war. You can't handle disagreement without claiming conspiracy. You can't handle losing without claiming the game was rigged. Trump's hands shook. That's not true. That's absolutely not. Isn't it? Obama challenged. When you lost the popular vote, what did you do? Claimed millions voted illegally, with zero evidence. When polls showed negative approval, what did you do? Called them fake news? When journalists reported facts you didn't like? Called them enemies of the people? He shook his head slowly. That's not leadership, Donald. That's authoritarianism. That's what dictators do. And every day you behave that way, you damage this office, this democracy, and the trust that holds this system together. Trump's jaw worked silently before he could form words. You have no right to come into my office and talk to me this way. I earned this position. I won fair and square. Did you? Obama asked quietly. Did you really win fair and square? Or did you win with help from foreign interference, stolen data, targeted misinformation, voter suppression? These are questions historians will ask for decades, and your desperate attempts to block investigations don't exactly inspire confidence. Trump's face went through rapid color changes. How dare you question my legitimacy? How dare you? About exactly what you've spent years doing to me, Obama finished. Yes, Donald, how does it feel? How does it feel to have your legitimacy questioned? Not pleasant, is it? The realization seemed to hit Trump physically. His mouth opened, then closed. The difference, Obama continued relentlessly, is that when people questioned me, I provided evidence. Documents, facts, verification. When people question you, you scream and threaten and obstruct. You see the difference? Evidence versus evasion. Trump's voice came out as almost a growl. Get out of my office now. I'm going, Obama assured him. But before I do, let me leave you with one final thought. He paused, making sure Trump was looking at him. You could have been great, Donald. You had the opportunity. You had the platform. You had millions of Americans who believed in you, who trusted you. He let that sit before continuing. But instead of rising to the occasion, you've spent every day settling scores, spreading lies, and dividing this nation. Instead of being a president for all Americans, you've been a president for your base, your ego, and your bank account. And that is the real tragedy. Trump looked ready to explode. His breathing was heavy and rapid. I've watched you these past years, Obama said, voice softer now. I've watched you tear down everything I tried to build. Healthcare protections, gone. Environmental regulations, dismantled. International relationships, destroyed. And I've asked myself, why? He paused, genuinely waiting for an answer. Trump said nothing. And I finally figured it out, Obama continued. It's not about policy. It's not about conservative versus liberal. It's about me. Everything you've done has been about erasing my legacy, about proving Barack Obama was wrong. He stepped closer. But here's what you haven't realized. You can dismantle every program I created. You can reverse every policy. You can try to erase every trace of my presidency. But you can't erase what I represented. You can't destroy what I stood for. And you can't change the fact that I will be remembered as someone who tried to unite this country while you're being remembered as someone who tore it apart. Trump's knuckles had gone completely white. That's not, you can't. I can, Obama said simply. And I just did. Obama moved toward the door one final time, and this time, nothing would stop him. He'd said what needed saying. He'd delivered truths Trump needed to hear. But as his hand touched the doorknob, Trump's voice came out, cracked and desperate. Wait! Obama paused but didn't turn around. What? Why did you really come here today? Trump asked, and for the first time, his voice sounded genuinely vulnerable. You knew what I was going to do. You knew I'd bring up the birth certificate. You knew this would turn ugly. So why? Obama finally turned around, his expression softening slightly. Not by much, but enough to show that beneath the righteous anger, there was still compassion, still hope, however faint. Because I'm an optimist, Donald, he said quietly, his voice carrying a mix of sadness and stubborn hope. Even after everything you've done, everything you've said, every norm you've shattered, every institution you've attacked, every ally you've alienated, I still hold out this tiny sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, you might listen, that maybe you might realize you have an opportunity to actually help people instead of just helping yourself, to actually serve the country instead of just serving your own ego and interests. He shook his head slowly, genuine disappointment written across his features. I came here hoping that when we sat down face to face, without cameras or crowds or Twitter, without all the performance and posturing, maybe the man underneath all that bluster might emerge. Maybe the person you were before all the fame and controversy consumed. You might remember what it feels like to simply, honestly serve your country, to put America truly first, not just as a slogan, but as a guiding principle that actually means something. Trump's expression was unreadable. He looked at Obama like he was seeing him for the first time, not as a rival or enemy, but as another human being who had carried the weight of the presidency. Did you find him? Trump asked quietly. That person? Obama considered the question for a long moment. Honestly, I don't know if he exists anymore. I don't know if he ever did. But I had to try, because that's what you do when you love your country. You keep trying, even when it seems hopeless. He opened the door, pausing in the threshold. The truth doesn't need permission to exist, Donald. It just does. And no matter how many lies you tell, no matter how much noise you make, no matter how hard you try to rewrite history, the truth about both of us, about our presidencies, about who we were in this moment, that truth will survive. Trump stood alone behind his desk. Barack, he called out, stopping Obama one last time. Obama looked back over his shoulder. This isn't over, Trump said, but there was no heat in it anymore, just statement of fact. No, Obama agreed sadly. I don't suppose it is. And with that he left, the door closed with a heavy final sound that seemed to echo through the entire White House, through the halls of power, through history itself. Trump stood there for a long moment, frozen in place, his hands still halfway extended from their earlier failed handshake. The room that had been charged with energy now felt cold and empty and somehow smaller. His staff members stood awkwardly along the walls, unsure of what to do, whether to speak, whether to acknowledge what had just happened. Finally, Trump lowered himself back into his chair, staring at the desk without really seeing it. His face had returned to a normal color, but his eyes told a different story. For the first time that day, there wasn't anger behind them. There was just confusion, and maybe something that looked like doubt. One sentence kept replaying in his mind. "You could have been great," could have, past tense, as if that opportunity had already passed, wasted on petty grievances instead of genuine leadership. He looked toward the window where afternoon sun was beginning to fade. Outside, the American flag fluttered in. The breeze. For just a split second, Trump looked almost reflective. Then his jaw tightened. His expression hardened. The walls came back up. "Get me my schedule," he muttered to his aide, his voice lacking its usual commanding bite. But even as Trump tried to move on, tried to push the meeting from his mind, something had changed. The meeting that was supposed to humiliate Barack Obama had ended in profound silence, and that silence spoke louder than any words possibly could. What does real leadership mean to you after hearing this story? Is it power and control? Or is it honesty and integrity, even when nobody's watching? Drop your answer in the comments. I really want to hear your perspective. Meanwhile, down the marble hallway, Barack Obama walked with steady, measured steps. Each footfall echoed softly against the polished floor, a sound that somehow seemed louder in the profound quiet that had settled over this section of the White House. Secret Service agents followed at a respectful distance behind him, their practiced neutrality and professional composure barely concealing their own shock at what they'd just witnessed through the office windows. Obama didn't look angry as he walked. He didn't look triumphant or victorious. If anything, he looked deeply tired, physically, emotionally, spiritually tired from years of fighting these same battles, answering these same baseless accusations, defending truths that should never have needed defending. But he also looked peaceful, like a man who had just done something profoundly difficult, but absolutely necessary, like someone who had spoken truth that needed speaking, regardless of whether it would be received or rejected. As he reached the main corridor where late afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall, arched windows, casting long shadows across the floor, one of the staffers waiting by the door stepped forward nervously. She was young, probably just an intern fresh out of college, and she looked visibly shaken by the tension she'd witnessed, by the intensity of the confrontation that had unfolded. "Sir," she said quietly, voice trembling, "are you okay?" Obama stopped walking and turned to face her. For a moment, he seemed to really see her, not as a staffer or intern, but as a young American worried about her country. He smiled then, not a big smile, but a genuine one. Warm and reassuring despite everything that had just happened. "I'm fine," he told her gently, "but I hope the country will be too." Those words carried a quiet weight that made the young woman's eyes well up slightly. She nodded, not trusting her voice to speak. Obama continued walking, heading toward the exit, toward the fresh air and open sky beyond these walls that had witnessed so much of America's story. He stepped outside, into the early evening air. The sky had transformed into a canvas of gold and orange and deep purple, the kind of light that feels almost symbolic. It was peaceful in a way that the White House interior hadn't been for months. Obama stopped for a moment on the steps, looking up at the flag mounted above him. The same flag he'd served under for 8 years, the same flag he'd sworn to defend, the same flag that represented not just a country but an idea. He didn't say anything aloud, but his expression communicated volumes. Pride for what he'd accomplished, sadness for opportunities being wasted, hope that somehow, someday, things would get better, and a kind of melancholy that comes from loving something deeply while watching it struggle. The conversation inside that office hadn't just been about him and Trump. It hadn't been about personal grudges or political rivalry. It had been about something much more fundamental: truth versus lies, dignity versus degradation, leadership versus demagoguery. And everyone who had witnessed it understood that this moment would be remembered, would be discussed, would be analyzed by historians trying to understand this chaotic period in American history. Obama took a deep breath of cool evening air, let it fill his lungs, then released it slowly. For a brief moment, you could almost see the weight lifting from his shoulders. Not completely, never completely, but enough to keep moving forward. He knew people would hear about this meeting eventually. Maybe some would twist the story, reshape it to fit their preferred narrative. Maybe some would deny it happened at all. But that didn't matter to him, because the truth doesn't depend on who believes it. It doesn't need approval or consensus, it just is. Later that evening, in a quiet interview setting far from the White House, Obama sat down for a previously scheduled conversation about leadership. The interviewer had no idea what had transpired earlier. No one outside that room did yet. But somehow the questions felt eerily relevant. "What do you think makes a great leader?" the interviewer asked. Obama smiled that familiar, knowing smile, the one that had defined his presidency. conveying wisdom and warmth and a touch of sadness all at once. Leadership isn't about being the loudest person in the room, he said thoughtfully. It's about being the one who listens when no one else wants to. It's about having difficult conversations even when they're uncomfortable. It's about standing on principle even when it costs you politically. The interviewer nodded, sensing something deeper behind these words. It's easy to throw insults, Obama continued, his tone becoming softer, more reflective. It's easy to spread rumors or attack your opponents or play to people's worst impulses. But it takes real strength to stay calm when others lose control. Real strength doesn't come from shouting. It comes from standing on truth, especially when that truth is hard to hear. He leaned back, his gaze distant. When I was in office, I made mistakes. I'll be the first to admit that. But I learned something important. Leadership demands honesty, even when it's uncomfortable, maybe especially when it's uncomfortable. After a short pause, he added something that would be quoted for years. Integrity isn't about how you act when the cameras are on. It's about who you are when no one's watching. It's about the choices you make in private meetings, in difficult moments when you think nobody will ever know. Those words hung in the air, simple, clear, powerful, and somewhere in that truth was the heart of everything that had unfolded earlier that day. As night fully settled over Washington, the lights in the White House glowed softly against the darkening sky, like a beacon standing sentinel over the nation's capital. Inside those walls, Trump's team had already begun damage control, spinning the narrative, preparing statements, trying to move past what had happened without acknowledging the full truth. They'd call it just a meeting, a routine discussion, a productive conversation. But those who had been in the room would remember it very differently. They'd remember the moment Trump brought up the birth certificate and Obama's calm, devastating response. They'd remember the rising tension as Obama refused to be provoked, refused to play Trump's game. They'd remember Trump's increasingly desperate attempts to regain control of a conversation that had slipped away. They'd remember the silence after Obama's final words, that heavy, profound silence that communicated more than any speech ever could. And they'd remember the way Trump's hand hung in the air, unanswered, as Obama walked out with quiet dignity. That image, that single moment frozen in time, would become symbolic of something larger, a metaphor for the clash between two completely different approaches to leadership, two completely different definitions of strength, two completely different visions for America. One man believed power came from domination, from winning every confrontation, from never backing down or admitting error. The other believed power came from principle, from staying grounded in truth, from having the courage to be honest even when it was difficult. In his private reflection later that night, Obama was said to have written a single sentence in his leather-bound notebook: "Power fades, truth doesn't." 5 words that captured everything he'd tried to communicate, not just to Trump, but to anyone who would listen, to history itself. That's what he had tried to show in that office. That leadership isn't about humiliation or revenge or settling scores. It's about something bigger than any individual ego. It's about humility, about service, about understanding that the office you hold is temporary, but the principles you stand for are eternal. Obama knew his words wouldn't change Trump. You can't reason someone out of a position they didn't reason themselves into. You can't use logic and evidence to change a mind that wasn't formed by logic and evidence in the first place. You can't fact someone out of beliefs built on emotion, identity, and deep-seated grievances rather than rational analysis. But maybe his words would reach someone else, some young staffer who'd been standing nervously in the room, some aide who'd witnessed the exchange and would carry it with them for the rest of their career, some future leader who would one day read about this moment in history books and learn something crucial from it about what leadership truly means. That was enough. That had to be enough. As Obama left the building that evening, he did so without needing applause or cameras or headlines. He hadn't come seeking validation or victory. He'd come to deliver a message that needed delivering, to speak truth to power in its most literal form. And he'd done exactly that. The confrontation would be discussed for years to come, analyzed in minute detail by political scientists and historians, debated endlessly by pundits and commentators, referenced in classrooms and boardrooms and dinner table conversations across America and around the world. Some would claim Obama was disrespectful, that he'd crossed unspoken lines of decorum, that he'd violated the traditional understanding about how former presidents should behave toward sitting presidents, that his words were too harsh, too direct, too confrontational for someone who no longer held the office. Others would call him a hero, A brave voice of moral clarity cutting through the darkness of troubled times, someone who'd had the courage to say what millions upon millions of Americans were thinking but couldn't properly articulate, someone who'd stood up and spoken truth when it desperately needed to be spoken. The truth, as usual, was more nuanced than either extreme. Obama wasn't perfect, he'd never claimed to be. But in that moment, in that office, he'd represented something important. The idea that facts matter, that truth matters, that character matters, that how we treat each other matters. And in an era when those things seemed increasingly under attack, when alternative facts and fake news had become part of the lexicon, when lying had become normalized, Obama's stubborn insistence on truth felt almost revolutionary. He hadn't won by shouting louder. He hadn't dominated through force of personality. He'd simply let truth do the talking, and it had spoken louder than any insult or threat ever could. That was his real power, not the office he'd held or the title he'd earned, but the integrity he'd maintained, even when it would have been easier, more politically expedient, more personally satisfying to abandon it. As the story closes now, we're left with fundamental questions that extend far beyond one conversation between two men. What does leadership really mean in modern America? Is it power, popularity, the ability to control the news cycle? Or is it something quieter, deeper? The courage to be honest even when no one's watching, the strength to admit mistakes, the humility to put country before ego? Is strength defined by how loudly you can shout? Or is it defined by how calmly you can stand in the face of provocation, how clearly you can articulate truth when surrounded by lies? Because as Obama showed that day in the White House, in that historic office filled with the ghosts of presidents past, with the weight of American history, truth doesn't need to fight. It doesn't need to scream or threaten or dominate. It just needs to stand. And when it does, when truth stands firm against the howling winds of falsehood and manipulation, it proves itself more powerful than any lie could ever be. That's the real comeback, not a clever retort or devastating insult or moment of public humiliation. The real comeback was refusing to be diminished, refusing to engage on dishonest terms, refusing to let falsehoods go unchallenged just because challenging them was uncomfortable. The real comeback was showing through action rather than words, through calm rather than chaos, through dignity rather than degradation, what actual leadership looks like. So, Celebrity Chronicles family, we've reached the end of this incredible story, and I want to hear from you. What's your biggest takeaway from Obama's response to Trump? Did this story change how you think about real leadership? What would you have done in Obama's position? Would you have walked away, fought back differently, or handled it exactly like he did? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely read every single one and love hearing your perspectives. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think differently, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to Celebrity Chronicles if you haven't already, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message about integrity, truth, and what real leadership actually looks like. Remember, stories like these aren't just about famous people or political drama. They're about the principles that define us all, about choosing truth over convenience, about standing firm when it would be easier to back down, about understanding that real power doesn't come from the position you hold, but from the character you demonstrate. Thank you for being part of this journey with Celebrity Chronicles. Until next time, keep seeking truth, keep standing for what's right, and keep believing that integrity still matters, because it does. It always has, and it always will. See you in the next story.